I believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion are incomplete, especially with the globalized world. We all face language barriers. And so we are really oppressing a big segment of the population without even knowing.
Well, hello, Slay family. Today we are joined by a special guest breaking down language barriers and making the world more accessible for everybody. We're really excited to have her here today. Joining me is our special guest, Carol Velandia. Thank you so much for being here, Carol.
Thank you, Leanne. It's a pleasure for me to be here and an honor.
It is a pleasure and honor to have you here. So we're going to kick off this morning, and you are in an incredibly exciting field that makes the world a better place for lots of people from different cultures. Can you please take a minute, first of all, and tell everybody a little bit about your background and your inspiration to enter this field and make a difference?
Thank you. I'm Carol Velandia. I am originally from Colombia. I moved to the United States approximately 20 years ago when I was a very young adult, and had the fortune to learn English here in the US. I actually started learning English a little bit when I did my cultural exchange year in South Korea. Somehow I ended up learning English there a little bit, and then I learned English here. But language was a bit of a challenge for me in the places where I have lived. So that's how my inspiration started. I am very interested in traveling, languages, flamenco dancing, and my inspiration is to bring everybody to the table through language access. I believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion are incomplete unless you add language access as part of it. So this is my inspiration and the work I do.
And coming from your experience, you came here, you had language barriers. Why do you think it is important, and what do you think needs to evolve so that people will have better access, whether that would be culturally or things that you see in the law?
Yes, very interesting question, and also many different parts to that question. So we all, especially with a globalized world, we all face language barriers at one point or another. If you travel and the country where you're traveling to doesn't speak the language that you speak, you're going to face a language barrier. But let's contextualize my answers to the US. I definitely faced a language barrier when I moved here. I just knew a bit of English. And I realized, especially once I was speaking English rather well, that words matter and can make a tremendous difference. In fact, one of the first things that happened to me after a few years after I was already here and I was hired by a big institution, I used the wrong word, a word that sounds very similar in English and Spanish. I used the word terminated to explain that I had finished my work at a prior organization. And that word brought me a whole bunch of negative consequences, including having to go back to my country and await a visa there simply because I used the wrong word. I had to then prove that I wasn't terminated at my previous work, but rather all I was trying to say was that I had ended my work there to move on to the new job. So that back then, all I felt around this experience was like guilt, and I should have known better, and et cetera, et cetera. And really, the topic of language access and language barriers was not in my consciousness yet. It wasn't until later that it became apparent that it affects more people than you think, In fact, there are approximately 26 million people in the United States that don't speak English, and for them, access to public and private services is very challenging because they don't speak the language. So we all, as a society, need to be more aware of this problem. We talk a lot about diversity, a lot about inclusion, and I think that's great, but we're forgetting a very important aspect, and this is the aspect I bring to the table, is language diversity. We don't include that in any of our planning, and we will certainly talk about that more, but that's something that's a number we have to keep in mind. We have 26 million people here, and the way we are solving the issue is very subpar. We're using children to do the interpretation, children to translate, usually the children of the immigrants. So we are really, really oppressing a big segment of the population without even knowing. And I think that the other part of your question was about laws, or you wanted to. Yes. And so there are, in fact, a few laws in the United States that protect the limited English proficient person. And I wish more public and private organizations would know about these laws. But there are there.
So there's some in place, but there isn't an awareness so that they're being implemented. Is that an accurate assessment?
Correct. They are in place, but there is no awareness. And also, they are not, and you're an attorney, right? So so the problem with what the legislation that we have right now is that it's not as strong as let's say a law. And I don't want to go into the legal aspects too much. I am not an attorney, but suffice it to say that we have Title VI of the Civil Rights Act that prevents discrimination on the basis of national origin, which is a proxy for language. And that's the main thing we have. There are other pieces of legislation, like the Affordable Care Act 1557, and there is also Executive Order 13166. However, there is a lot that cannot be enforced around this. It's not like, for example, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is an actual law, and it has stronger protections to people with disabilities, right? If you violate the Americans with Disabilities Act, you can face significant consequences. If you, for example, don't offer language access, I mean, you might get slapped on the wrist, but nothing much happens. That has been my experience.
Yeah, and also I think when you look at the American with Disabilities Act, there's a lot of physical, visible things that take place. So, wheelchair access and different things like that. You see that when you walk in. There's a lot of things that may not be quite as apparent to people when it comes to, speaking, as opposed to physical obstacles. Even though it's just as important, it may not be something that
and I think
walk
you
in
got
and say
frozen.
that's missing here. I mean, I remember we were just visiting colleges with our son, and I remember going into one building and I thought, oh my gosh, there's no access for somebody. I noticed it right away. There was a huge flight of steps to get to one of the buildings, and there was no other way to get in there. And it was so physically obvious. I think this is kind of an under the radar, so to speak, problem for some people. They don't notice it until the problem really is in their face.
Correct. It's not a physical disability. And I'm so sorry, I missed a part of your question because there was a problem with the internet. I don't know if at my end or your end, but I think you were offering an example of a person in a wheelchair.
Yes, I was just saying that when somebody is, if somebody has a physical disability, they can see right away that there's going to be a problem because there should be a ramp or there should be something. But you could go into a business and not know until you're already in there and you're struggling that there isn't language access as opposed to a physical access. So,
Right.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Please, if you would take a minute. This went from something that you were not interested in to something you became very passionate about to now a career change. So can you tell everyone about your business and how you help companies, please?
Yes, and I just wanted to make a short comment about that disability of the language. So as you say, yes, a physical disability is very apparent, but when a person doesn't speak the language, is completely neglected, right? That's a really good point. However, it is important to mention also that the Americans with Disabilities Act protect people with that are deaf and hard of hearing, but it doesn't protect people that have limited English, because whether the definition, I believe the definition of disability is expansive enough to include people that at that moment cannot use language to communicate but I don't think we are necessarily ready to call everybody that doesn't speak English disabled, right? Or maybe we have a bias around the word. I'm not sure. But in any case, it doesn't protect the 26 million people. So it is my wish that we create laws for these particular populations, very specific. It's people that don't speak English, and that we bring the legislation to a standard similar to the Americans with Disabilities Act, which protects people that are deaf and hard of hearing.
So sometimes when I've interacted with people from different cultures, I also find that they are hesitant to really express that they're having trouble understanding something. And sometimes it is out of wanting to fit in and a need to feel like, they're not embarrassed. Sometimes they feel like it would be disrespectful. So do you find in your experience that sometimes people don't speak up right away if they maybe understand some English, but they don't want to come forth and say that they really don't understand the context of an entire conversation?
Absolutely. Culturally, and I'm going to talk more specifically about the Latin American culture because that's the other language I speak, and that is the culture I'm from. Yes, there is a shame. There's a feeling of shame about not speaking English. You don't want to be a burden. You don't want to be a bother. And this is unfortunate because I wish more people knew they have rights. You have a right to be able to communicate. And I see that they don't express. I didn't understand fully what you were trying to tell me, because instead of knowing their right, their mind gets into the I am ashamed because I should have known English already, right? And I wish it wasn't like that. On the other hand, I also think there is an overestimation of your language skills on the side of the English speakers when they speak a second language, and they believe that they, for example, speak Spanish because they spent 2 weeks in Costa Rica and they want to break the language barrier in a situation like that is critical, let's say a medical appointment, with that little Spanish. That I think is also a problem. So it's a compound problem from both sides.
So let's dive into your profession. Can you tell everybody about your business and how you help companies?
Yes, my inspiration really started when I was working as an interpreter at one of the major hospitals in the United States, located in Baltimore, and I came across this person. I'm gonna name him Jose, from Honduras. He came to the U.S. He had to overcome a number of difficulties, including gang violence, poverty, lack of opportunity, you name it. And he decided to come and have a better life here. He was sent back. He actually came through using the train, the freight train that is nicknamed La Bestia. I'm not sure if you're familiar with La Bestia, but it's a train that is infamous for maiming people, because people in desperation all across Central America, they jump into the train. It's not for passengers. And sometimes they fall, they get run over. I mean, it's a terrible situation, but people are in such situations in their countries that they rather do that than staying. And this was the case of Jose. He comes here and he gets sent back to his country. He comes a second time, goes through the desert, the Sonora Desert, a 50-mile walk. It's a very perilous journey. And then he gets sick. And remember, I work at this major hospital where you only go there once you have something terrible. I mean, not always the case, but in his case, he had some kind of symptom. And by the time I met him, he tells me, "I'm so glad you're here because this appointment got canceled last time." And I say, "Why was that?" He said, "Because there was no interpreter." And okay, we went into the appointment, and he got this terrible diagnosis. And wait a minute, we delayed this person 2 months in his treatment because there was a language barrier. And we're talking about this major world famous institution that is top top of the line. And I started investigating and doing research on the topic. And that's how I ended up creating my business, which is called Equal Access Language Services, because I wanted to bring awareness about language access, language rights, language justice, but specifically about what language access is, which simply means giving the same level of service that you would give to an English speaker to a non-English speaker. That's it. I mean, if you are treating them in any way differently, you are discriminating against them. So if you come to a business and you don't speak English and somebody tells you, I'm sorry, we don't understand what you're saying, and they turn you around, they are discriminating against you, because especially if this is a program that receives federal funds, right? So if you're a hospital, if you are any kind of program that receives, whether directly or indirectly, federal funding, you are supposed to provide language access. And they cannot tell you, sorry, we don't have an interpreter, go away. They cannot tell you that, or shouldn't tell you that, at least. And that's how my business started. And I help organizations create language access plans and become really inclusive. As I said at the beginning, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I always wonder, how are you including the people that don't speak English? Because this is a 9% of the population that you're leaving out. So unless you have a plan for them, you're really not being inclusive.
And it's an incredible point that you make, and I can't believe that gentleman had a 2-month delay. That is crazy. But when you look at, obviously, the person who does not have access, it's really a problem for them. What encouraging thing or what vision would you paint for an organization on why it's important for them to provide that service or be prepared to help people?
I want organizations, let's think about a hospital, for example, and with the specific example with Jose.
Mhm.
It is important to them to provide effective language access, because the cost drivers of healthcare are actually people that are either uninsured, undocumented, which usually are in the same category. And they end up being the frequent flyers, in the sense that they recurrently come to the hospital. Why? Because, and this is one of the reasons, and there is research on this, they can communicate well. So let's say they had and this was a case I experienced, a surgery. The person was discharged, and he didn't understand the instructions. They were not in Spanish. He didn't know how to take care of the wound. He returns 5 days later or 1 week later with a terrible infection. He gets admitted to the hospital. He doesn't have insurance. He spends 10 days at the hospital. So which is more expensive? Taking care of a person that has to return for a lack of communication, or paying a professional interpreter to do the job? There are so many examples, Leanne, about how any interaction where you don't understand can go wrong. And the most famous or infamous one is the one of Willie Ramirez, that this happened many years ago. And this is the most shocking example, but I can assure you there are examples every day. Willie Ramirez was an athlete, a young athlete of Hispanic descent, and he came to the hospital complaining of he used the word intoxicado. And the word intoxicado sounds very similar to the word intoxicated. And the person that was doing the interpretation for him was not a professional interpreter, was just an ad hoc interpreter, some bilingual person. And so she used the word intoxicated. And the doctor thought, okay, he's probably drunk. I mean, young and Hispanic, probably drunk, and put it on an observation room, not realizing that he had something else. And in fact, he ended up having a major aneurysm and became quadriplegic because he wasn't seen on time. And this is because of this word, intoxicado versus intoxicated. So let's remember in healthcare, for example, that communication is the major diagnostic tool. If you're not communicating well in a healthcare context, you are basically offering veterinary medicine. You're not really assessing your patient appropriately. That's just one example.
So intoxicated obviously means something different in English, but a word that sounds really similar in two languages can have wildly different interpretations and meanings to them.
Exactly, like the word terminated, which means in
Yes.
one language means ending, and the other one means like there was some issue there and you were fired or
One is
let go.
completed and the other is you got fired. So they're two
Exactly.
very different things. Yes. So can you share a success story about your company and how you've been able to make a difference?
Well, I have one of my favorite stories is about a book that we transcreated, and for an organization that is trying to prevent sexual assault, sexual abuse, and language plays a big role on this. A lot of the people that are limited English don't report this kind of crime. So the success stories that we help them transcreate a book for children, and I will explain what transcreation is about. And so now the book is in Spanish and is adapted to the Hispanic or Latin American culture, I should say. So transcreation is beyond translation. So the translation is when you transfer the meaning, and this is in documents, by the way, not when you do it orally. When you do it orally, that's called interpretation. Translation is when you transfer the meaning from a written text to another language. And transcreation goes beyond that. You're not only transferring the meaning, but you're also transferring the cultural aspects of the book. So that is one of our success stories. But the other one, which was the sort of the catalyst for me to create a company, was a video called "Saving Lives in Many Languages" that I did for the Johns Hopkins Hospital, and it was calling attention on how language access is part of patient safety. This was many years ago, and the video made that clear that and there were a few points that were clear. One, that you should not use your limited language proficiency when there are professional interpreters. And the other point is that you don't want people that are professional. You don't want non-professional doctors to perform as doctors or nurses. So the same way, you don't want a non-professional interpreter to do what a professional interpreter does. And we talked about the kinds of mistakes that could go wrong. So that video actually invited doctors to be more mindful of calling the interpretation services, and the calls triple after the video.
That's incredible because it would be easy for someone, especially in the American culture, to go, oh, so and so is bilingual because they took some Spanish in college. But especially when you get into the specificity of, medical diagnosis and things like that that are so crucial and so important, the odds of the person having proficiency in that are pretty low. And, really, really low. Let's just be honest. So, with the things that you're working on, you're obviously making a difference. Can you share, what are some upcoming projects or some things that you're looking to do next?
Yes, Leanne, and what you are describing right now is one of the most common misconceptions, is that somebody bilingual can take the job of the interpreter, and we have seen how that goes wrong, with the case of Willie. But that goes wrong many times, and there are statistics on this. In fact, using non-English, non-professional interpreters can increase the risk of a person um, um, in terms of getting severe harm at a hospital by, 50%. It's tremendously high when you use a person that's not professional. So, and I'm sorry, the question was, can you repeat the question?
Yes. What are some upcoming projects
Ah,
that you have? Some things that you'll be accomplishing with your company?
Really exciting. It's the workshop I created that's called Effective Inclusion Through Language Access. It's an 8-hour course. It is credited for social workers, psychologists, and other mental health professionals. It's going to be given through the state of Maryland at the end of April. So in this course, we talk about the very strong bias that we have against people that don't speak English, right? Also the misconception about in America we speak English. What does that mean? I mean, we do speak English in the US, right?
Yes.
But surprisingly, we don't even have an official language in the US. And that's one of the things we work through. And we talk about effective tools for organizations and businesses to really include the limited English proficient population. So we have we work through the misconceptions on interpretation and translation, and we provide very clear guidelines on how to create a language access plan, and how and why every single organization and every single kind of business should have a language access plan.
And that course that you mentioned is taking place in Maryland. Is it all in person only, or is there online access for people?
Well, that's such a good question, because right now it's in person, and I was just today talking about making it online as well, but also asynchronous. I have done it online for other companies and organizations, especially during COVID, but we want to do it self-paced as well, so that it helps institutions of any kind to, for them to work on or understand what language access is all about at their own pace. But we don't have that product yet. We will let you know.
Yes, absolutely. It would expand your impact, which would be very exciting. So if somebody is listening or watching this and they would like to get involved, whether, they could be a professional interpreter and they don't know where to help, or whether they're at a business where they see that there's a lack of support, or whether they want to hire you, can you tell us a little bit about how people can find your company online, or if you have social media, or any way that you could be accessible, or any way that they can get involved too?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. For people that would like to become interpreters, this is for everybody. My website is www.equalaccesslanguageservices.com. It's a little bit long, and there is a contact sheet there. They can send us a question through the website. There is also a podcast called Language Access Matters, and this is more for people to understand what language access is all about. I recognize that this, even though this topic, I couldn't exactly call it new, but for us, things are now opening up about this topic. And I created this podcast last year. It's the first podcast exclusively on language access and how language access help businesses and organizations. So I invite you to listen. It's in Podbean, and it's called Language Access Matters. And for people who want to work as interpreters, there are many training options. As I just said, it's better for you to be a professional interpreter than just a bilingual person. And being a professional interpreter has a lot of counterintuitive things that bilinguals don't know about. Specifically, everything that's in the code of ethics, you would be always surprised, or like, really, I'm not supposed to do this, but do this, and so on and so forth. So I think, and we do provide courses, but if we're not running a course, there are so many other organizations that I'm happy to forward the potential interpreters to, so that they can learn what's involved in being a community interpreter, for example. And by the way, there are many types of interpreters. There are community interpreters, there are legal interpreters, conference interpreters. There are many specialties, just like any profession. And for companies, definitely contact me. I am on LinkedIn, and I am also by email. My email is my full name, Carol Velandia at equalaccesslanguageservices.com. And I help companies that want to create their own language access plan. The size of the company does not matter. And we have all sorts of solutions, because maybe you are wondering, well, I may have one person every month, but not every day, right? What do I do to offer a language access? What do I do to offer language access? I can say, look, we offer 24/7 services. In fact, if a company connects with my company, we can offer the service in 250 languages, live interpretation, and they just need to call a particular number, and they get connected to an interpreter, and they would be supporting a small business, women-owned, that is having a mission to have a positive impact in this society.
What an incredible solution. So if somebody just finds themselves every once in a while, you could see where they wouldn't need an interpreter on a consistent basis. But having a company like you means they can reach out and just like that, they can get help. They can lead in making a difference for people, support you. I love that across the board. What a fantastic solution.
Yes, it's really ideal for small businesses that don't want to turn anyone away, right? You just want to understand what the person in front of you is trying to tell you. Dial up. We get you the Russian interpreter that you need immediately within seconds. I mean, the response time is really short. So that's a way to offer language access that's not extremely. It's not even expensive because they get charged by the minute as opposed to hiring a full 2 hour interpreter, right?
Mhm.
So we bring those solutions, and also we help companies that want to translate documents, websites, etc., or that want to review these websites. We understand that for many languages there are artificial intelligence solutions that are good but are short of being a final product. And we just a word of caution. We offer that service, like we finish that work that the artificial intelligence doesn't do for some languages. We help with that as well.
I just want to wrap up and tell you, I'm thinking about how many times your service could help so many people. Probably about 6 or 7 years ago, unfortunately, I was in a car accident, and the person who hit my car hit it with such speed it totaled both of our cars, and he spoke only Russian. So the ambulance came to take us, and he was terrified and he didn't want to get out of the car. And the police couldn't speak to him, the paramedics couldn't speak to him. They're putting me in an ambulance, and nobody thought to do anything or knew of a company like yours. What an amazing difference, especially if you're pulling somebody out of a car. You have to be so careful. And they had no idea what hurt him or what had happened. So I just hope that we can spread the word, because I think that there's so many different organizations and companies that could benefit from accessing a company like yours. So thank you so much for what you're doing to help people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Leanne. And I hope everything about the accident is far gone.
Yes, many years yet later, all better, all better. Thank you so much.
Good, good.
Okay, well, thank you for being here. And everyone, again, check out her website, spread the word. This is a great way for people to be able to empower each other, and a great way for businesses to be more effective. So again, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Really appreciate your time today.